Welcome to the Backstage Creative, the podcast that focuses on the people who work behind the scenes of theater. My name is Krista Copper, and normally on this podcast, I interview someone who works behind the scenes of theater. So someone who stage manages or music directs, choreographs, designs, plays instruments, so on and so forth. Today is a little different episode because it's just me talking. And I'm doing this episode because the Backstage Creative is turning 1. It was December of last year, 2018, when I released the first episode of the Backstage Creative. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about why I wanted to start this podcast in the first place and some of the things I've learned along the way. Really, the genesis of the idea behind this podcast came when I was in grad school, and the professor I was studying with at the time, his name is Robert Black. He's a phenomenal contemporary modern music double bassist, and he and I and some other players in our studio were in a recording session. And there was at one point we were standing there. We were waiting for something. The engineer was trying to fix a mic or do something, and we were just standing around. And Robert made the comment of, just because you're not doing something doesn't mean that something isn't happening. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I wonder what's happening. Like, I wonder what problem is trying to be solved, or I wonder what, the people behind the glass are talking about and working on. And that comment just stayed with me, and I mulled over it for a while. A few weeks later, I was doing a show. I think it was like a production of Rent or something, I think. And it was during Tech Week, and I went into my private lesson with Robert, and we were talking, and he was asking about how the show was going. And I said, tech rehearsals they're just so boring. There's these long stretches of time where I'm just sitting there, and like, it just gets so long. And he was like, just because you're not doing something doesn't mean something isn't happening. And I was like, oh man, you're so right. Like, it's so true. And so that's really when I started to, one, be more patient during tech rehearsals. And two, I started noticing like what was going on. If I'm just sitting here, not doing anything, like maybe I can learn something. Maybe I could, watch what all these people walking around are trying to accomplish. And, maybe there's something that I can learn from that. It was around this time, a little later, I got in. Someone introduced me to a writer and podcaster and blogger named Seth Godin. If you don't know who Seth Godin is, he's amazing. He's phenomenal. He has a podcast called Akimbo, which I highly recommend. He's written a lot of books. He comes from a business, entrepreneurship, marketing background, but he is really, it's so hard to try to describe what he does. And one of his big things is creating meaning in the work that you do, right? Like, the work that you do shouldn't just be about making money. It shouldn't just be about trying to sell. It should be about trying to solve problems, other people's problems. It should be about, marketing isn't just like buy this product or, support my podcast or read my blog. It should be about reaching the needs of other people and bringing them in, and creating community in the work that you do. That really stuck out to me. I highly recommend. His books are Purple Cow, Linchpin, This is Marketing. Like I say, he's a podcast. He sends out a blog every day. If you sign up for his like newsletter, you get an email every morning with a blog post that he's written, and they're just really insightful. He's very wise. He encourages people to make a ruckus. Like, that's his thing, is we're in charge of shaping culture, and we're in charge of where culture goes, and we can influence culture by the quality of work that we do, and by, like I said, creating community and solving someone's problem for them. Another thing that he talks a lot about is, he says the best time to create a podcast or a blog was 10 years ago, and the second best time is today. And the more I heard that, the more I was like, I need to start something. But at the time, I didn't quite know what. I enjoy writing, but the idea of a blog didn't really appeal to me. I really liked podcasts. Like, I had really gotten into listening to a bunch of different podcasts. And so that, that was another seed that was planted, and that took a little while to germinate and take root. The full inception of this podcast really came to fruition the summer of 2018. I worked at theater in Creed, Colorado, Creed Repertory Theater. If you've listened to any of the episodes on the Backstage Creative, odds are you've listened to someone who worked at Creed Repertory Theater, because that's where I've interviewed a lot of people from there, just because they're amazing. They hire really quality people to work there, and the housing was arranged such that you didn't live with people who worked in the same field as you. So I was sharing like a pod with an actress and a patron services person and a stitcher and the paint charge. And one of the many great things about working in Creed, Colorado is it's really high in the mountains, and you don't have very good cell phone reception or internet. So during meals, we would sit around and have a discussion without technology, and it was amazing. I learned so much from just sitting, like hearing about people's jobs and hearing about the things that frustrated them and hearing about the projects that made them excited and the process that they had to go through in order to get a show up on stage and, to opening night. I remember thinking, this is so amazing. I never knew all of the worlds, all of these worlds with their own kind of language and their own skill sets existed. I mean, of course, I knew they were there, and that they were. Of course, I knew there was a costume shop that made the costumes for the actors on stage, but I never thought about all of the process of what it took to get those costumes on stage. I also worked with a phenomenal music director who I noticed was really great at communicating, and he was very clear with his communication, and he there wasn't a lot of misunderstanding, at least in the rehearsals that I participated in. There wasn't a lot of miscommunication with him because he was very clear. I also noticed that he slightly would change, not necessarily his tone of voice, but the words that he used and kind of the jargon he would throw around based on who he was talking with. So when he was talking to the sound engineer, he wouldn't use like he wouldn't use the same terms to describe what he was hearing that he would use with the musicians. Like with the musicians, he would use like our standard musical terminology that we use on a daily basis. But with the sound engineer, he would use he wouldn't use the same kind of vocabulary. It was the same when dealing with actors. He would change how he dealt with actors. He wasn't as abrupt with them. Like with musicians, he wasn't mean, but he was just very straightforward and okay, we missed that tempo change. Let's make sure to not do that again. Or he would say like, Chris, I think you're kind of out of tune. Can you check your tuning during break? So on and so forth. But with actors, he was very more complimentary, more positive, more. He would sugarcoat what he would say, and I thought that was really interesting because it worked really well. Most of the time, as a musician, I really value efficiency, and I think that's fairly common for most musicians. Like, just tell me what I did wrong. Most of the time, I know what I did wrong, but just like tell me straight and let's move on with this rehearsal. But with actors, you have to be a little more gentler, I guess, and that makes sense. They're the ones that are the most vulnerable in theater, and they're the ones that have to take on a lot rides on the shoulders of actors, and so it makes sense that when dealing with them, you want to build them up and help them be more confident and support them as they do the vulnerable work of bringing a character alive on stage. And so I noticed this and really admired it. During that summer, I remember when the Tonys were on. I didn't watch them. I'm not a huge fan of award shows, but like in the theater world, Tonys are the thing. So a group of people had watched the Tonys and they were sitting around talking about it the next day, and someone was frustrated that the all of the design awards are giving during commercial breaks, and then when you come back from commercial, you get like a 5-second glimpse of their speech, and like the whole evening builds to best actor and best actress, and it's so focused on the acting and how that the person who was talking was frustrated about that. And there was a part of me that was like, yeah, that's not fair. Like, if you can't hear the actor, if you can't see the actor, um, if they don't have anything to wear, like, there's no point to them being on stage. Like, why do they get all of the attention? When theaters do social media blasts advertising their shows, it's always the actor. It's never like, come see our show. The stage manager makes it run so smoothly, or come see our show. Our sound engineer balances the band with the vocals amazingly. It's never that. It's always so focused on the actor, and they're important. Obviously, I'm not. Please don't hear this as me talking down about actors, but I think there's room to give more attention and more appreciation to all of the other people that work in theater, because there's so many people that it takes to put up a live production. And I think sometimes, a lot of times, that all of that work and all of that passion and creativity goes unnoticed. That was also something that was in my mind and spinning around in my head as I was processing the final piece of the puzzle. It was before a show. I was the first one in the pit, and I was warming up a little bit, and the sound engineer was testing the system. He was testing the monitors, I believe, and one of the monitors must have stopped working or what didn't sound right. And so the sound engineer was in the pit messing with a monitor, and I asked him like what he was doing because I was curious about monitors. I'm not well versed in electronics and technology and all of the speakers and sound elements that go into theater, but I'm interested in it because it very much impacts and affects what I do and how I sound. And this engineer, who's still to this day the best sound engineer I've ever worked with, was telling me about the speaker, and he went on for a good 10 to 15 minutes about the motherboard on this monitor. When he finished, I said, you need to start a podcast. Like, there's totally a market for nerding out about motherboards on a monitor, right? Like, there's people out there who would love to hear you talk for that long about monitor. I was like, you would be so good at that. And then the rest of, other people started showing up and we had to do sound checks. So that was the end of that. Later that day, I was like, wait a minute. I should start a podcast. Like, I shouldn't be telling other people to start things. Like, I should start a podcast, and I should do it about the people who work behind the scenes of theater. And so it's all these pieces that I just spent several minutes explaining, just kind of clicked together of, being frustrated that people aren't getting the attention that I feel they deserve, and having these conversations that were helping me grow in my creativity and helping me become better at my job in the theater world. And so it was after that summer I decided to go for it. And so then a few months later, I released my first interview, and it was absolutely terrifying. I remember the first interview I wanted to put out. I had everything ready to go. I had it all in the hosting service that I use. I had the description written out. Everything was edited and put together. And all I had left to do was hit publish. It took me 4 hours to work up the courage to hit publish. And I can tell you those 4 hours were some of the most productive hours that I've ever had, right? Because I was like, oh, well, I could do this now, but I need to clean the bathroom, or, oh, I'm going to practice, or, oh man, now it's supper time. I should probably make some supper. I was like procrastinating like I've never done before. I'm not much of a procrastinator, but hitting publish on the first episode of the Backstage Creative was the biggest exercise in procrastination I've ever put myself through. But I did, and it's really hard to hear your own voice. It's really hard to hear how often you say like I edit these, and let me tell you, a lot of the editing I do is on my own voice, and is on what I'm saying and how many times I say or like make some weird sound, or or have to start a question over a few times in order to phrase it just right. And so I've learned so much from working on this show. When I initially sat down to put all of my ideas for the Backstage Creative together, I put it on an Evernote document, and I was just looking over that document, feeling nostalgic because it's almost been a year, and I was looking at some of my initial goals and my initial goals for the podcast that I wanted to achieve. One of them was, like what I've said earlier, was I wanted to put more spotlight on people who do technical work and who do are on the creative team and stage manage and do all of the things that just go so unnoticed and I think are underappreciated. With that being said, people who are in those careers, I don't think are usually the type that want to be in the spotlight and want that attention. But I do think that everyone wants to be heard, right? Everyone wants to be seen and wants to be appreciated. For me, this podcast was a way that I could appreciate people and that I could hold space for them to be seen and to give them space to share career wisdom that they've attained, give them space to talk about their life and favorite shows they've worked on. And that was a way that I could, honor people who are fairly invisible in their field, or at least invisible to the people that they're serving, which is the audience. Another goal of this podcast was to create opportunities for other people. When I accept a job, I take that job out of circulation, right? Like no other bass player was able to play at Creed Repertory Theater in 2018 because I took the job. I never feel guilty about taking a job, right? Like I don't sit around thinking like, oh man, like, oh, I hope another bass player isn't mad at me because they also applied for this job. Like I don't feel bad about taking jobs. I had been thinking that I wanted to do something that put something into the community. Like Seth Godin talks about, I wanted to contribute. I wanted to see other people. I wanted to contribute and I wanted to see other people. One of my ambitions for this podcast is that it gives other people opportunities, right? Like it can help people who are interviewed. It can maybe open doors for them, or maybe help them, something else they can add to their resume. And I hope that it also helps the people who listen. I hope it helps people have more empathy towards a sound engineer when they're frustrated that the sound isn't how they want it to be. Like there's so many factors that go into sound, and hopefully the sound engineer is doing their best. That was a big goal too, is just awareness, raising awareness around things that people are dealing with in their separate worlds. There's all these different worlds that operate and have to come together in order to create a production. And within those worlds, there's limitations, there's things that you can do, and there's things that just really aren't possible. And so it's my hope that through these interviews, those of us that listen can approach our jobs with more empathy and be able to see someone else's point of view, and be able to see their world more clearly. Doing a podcast is also a really great way to ask people to give up their time. I would like to think that I would sit around and have conversations with people about their job, regardless of whether I have a podcast or not. But I mean, life happens, and you have work to do, and you have life things to take care of, bills to pay, and whatnot. And sometimes there's just not time to just sit and talk to someone. Part of this comes from a selfish place of like, I just want to sit down and connect with someone and talk to them and be inspired by them and learn something from them. And asking someone to be interviewed on a podcast is a great way to do that. So that's a little bit of the history of the Backstage Creative and a little bit of my vision for this podcast. I encourage you, if you have something on your mind, whether it's a blog or a podcast or you want to write a book, I would encourage you to do it. It's scary. I had no idea what I was doing when I got into this. I had no idea how to record well. I had no idea how to edit. But I firmly believe that action begets clarity. Once you start taking action, once you start doing something, clarity comes from that. There's only so much research you can do. Initially, I did watch, a few YouTube videos. I read a few blogs about equipment and whatnot, but really the greatest learning came from just doing it, and just messing up. There's a few people I had to re-interview because the sound was just so bad. That was pretty hard to be like, I'm so sorry, but can we redo your interview? Like, I never want to have to ask someone to do that again, because it was kind of embarrassing, and time is so precious to everyone. And so those are lessons that you learn very quickly. And I think sometimes the things that we need to do are the things that we're afraid of. I was intimidated to start this podcast. I'm not the greatest speaker. Language isn't something that I particularly like. I'm sure that's why music is so attractive to me, is because it doesn't require language. I I can express myself. I can significantly relate to other people and build relationships with them through music making. You don't have to say a word, and you can have such deep relationships with the people that you create art with. Doing a project that's based on speaking was scary to me, but because it was scary to me, that was kind of a light bulb in my brain of like, okay, like that probably means I need to do it. This is a fear that I need to face. I also couldn't stop thinking about doing this project, and so I was like, well, I just need to do this project just so I can have some peace of mind that I did it and I started it, and I can stop obsessing about it. So, like that that Shia LaBeouf video, just do it. Just do it. It's scary, it's intimidating, it's messy. It's not going to be perfect. But I mean, I can say I may not be the best interviewer, I'm not the best at editing, but I'm a whole heck of a lot better than I was a year ago. You won't get better at anything until you start doing it. The first few years I played bass, they sounded really bad. But you don't learn how to play an instrument by watching YouTube videos. You learn to play an instrument by playing an instrument. Action begets clarity. So whatever, if you have a project on your mind that you are scared of doing but have a vision for, I just encourage you to do it. Like, be okay with making something that's messy. Be okay with publishing or shipping something that doesn't feel quite ready. Be a creator, be someone who solves a problem or creates a community or makes space for someone else. That's what we're here to do. We're not just here to make money and make a living, but we're here to create connections with people and to make art that inspires people. And so I know that this podcast has done that for me. So thank you for listening, whether this is your first episode or you've listened to them all. I greatly appreciate it. I'm greatly honored. There's so many podcasts out there. There's so many audiobooks. There's so much music. There's so many things that you could listen to. And so the fact that you're listening to this and the fact that maybe you've listened to all 24 episodes of the Backstage Creative, it's just, it means so much to me. And I deeply appreciate it. So thank you. All right. That's it. That's all I've got. I look forward to a new year in a few weeks, and I look forward to sharing with you the next episode of the Backstage Creative.